We're going to pick up in the book of Matthew chapter 15 and verse 21. And verse 21 is where we left off last week. When we left off, Jesus had just finished explaining the parable to the disciples. And remember, I talked about how Jesus knows exactly when you need a whack on the head, and he called Peter dull. He's like, Peter, what are you doing? Like, how many times do I have to explain this to you? But here we have, they've moved on. And we'll pick up here at verse 21 where it says, leaving that place, Jesus withdrew to the region of Tyre and Sidon. A Canaanite woman from that vicinity came to him, crying out, Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me. My daughter is demon-possessed and suffering terribly. Jesus did not answer a word, so his disciples came to him and urged him, send her away, for she keeps crying out after us. He answered, I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel. The woman came and knelt before him. Lord, help me, she said. He replied, it is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs. Yes, it is, Lord, she said. Even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall on their master's table. And then Jesus said to her, Woman, you have great faith. Your request is granted. And her daughter was healed at that moment. There's a couple things about this that I want to say. First one is, this has actually become a very popular verse as of late for really strange reasons. There are a lot of people saying here that this woman, not only a woman, a Canaanite woman, not just a Canaanite woman, but she's a Canaanite woman of color. Where they got that information, I don't know, but that's what they say. And she corrected Jesus, so Jesus needed to be corrected. And as I look at this story and I go through this, I see some of the things that they're talking about. Number one, there was a Canaanite woman there. And why were the Canaanites treated so differently? Right? Yes, men and women were treated differently, much, much differently in those days. But certainly that is not the issue here, because we see Jesus interacting with women and having conversations with other women in other instances. Her being a woman has nothing to do with this. And we also have to remember, this is at a time 2,000 years ago where no one talked about skin color. This was not a thing that came up. Because guess what? When you live in the gap between Europe and Asia and Africa, you're used to seeing everybody, okay? This wouldn't have been strange for them. To see such ethnic diversity from around the world would not have been strange in the land of Israel, because this is literally the connection for the entire planet. Why did God call it the land flowing with milk and honey? I'm not sure if you know much about that region of the world, but it's not very fertile in most of the land. Yes, the Jews have made it fertile, and that's amazing. I believe that's by the blessing and provision of God. But it was also always a trade hub for the entire world. Okay, so if that's not what's going on here, and if it's not about women, if it's not about skin color, if it's not, what is going on here? And it's that she's a Canaanite. And who were the Canaanites historically to the Jews? Well, many of us grew up hearing. I thought you put your hand up there for a second there, Lauren. I was like, oh, you're going to answer. Historically, right, we all know the stories. We were raised on stories from the book of Genesis and Exodus. We know about Joshua. And all of these times, we're reading about the Israel's greatest enemy, the Canaanites. The Canaanites, whom, by the way, it's funny because they're like, well, God commanded a genocide of the Canaanites, and he told them to wipe them out entirely, and then they went and they did it. And yet, for some reason, these Canaanites keep popping up. You guys notice that? Canaanites never go away. They're always there, and it's almost like there's a language thing here. And we talked about that when we were in the book of Judges. We talked about the idea of hyperbole and how language is being used. But one of the things that has been always true throughout the entire Jewish history is their greatest enemy was the Canaanites. The Canaanites were the ones that kept leading them astray, that led them to the worship of Baal and to Asherah and to Moloch. They're the ones that worship some of the most heinous gods. There's a reason why Samuel gives Saul the instruction from God to go in and not leave anyone in the army alive when he goes against King Abimelech. Abimelech? You guys know, the evil king. Nope. King of the Amorites, king of the Canaanites, king of the bad people. Like they were eating people. There was child sacrifice. These things were constantly being introduced. And so the Canaanites were often looked down on. Right? They still existed, right? They survived the persecution from the Greeks when they came in and they formed the 4 different empires there after Alexander the Great. They survived the Roman conquest as Rome came and expanded, and they are still there today, but they still do not get along with the Jews. And so for this Canaanite woman, see, this is why I believe that Jesus heals her daughter. It's a Canaanite woman, the reject, the outcast of their society, the lowest of the low. And yet even she comes before and she, on her knees, is crying out, Son of David, calling him Lord. Right? You are my master. I submit to you. This is a hard idea that we have here in 21st century Canada. We don't like submission. We've talked about this many times before, but submission is crucial. And that's what she's doing. She's submitting herself, putting herself under the authority of Jesus, crying out and asking for mercy for her young daughter. Jesus, of course, responds to her and tells her, right, it wouldn't be right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs. And of course, what he's talking about here, who are the children of God? He's saying the children are Israel, right? The chosen people, the one he's came to save. It is the ministry that Jesus came to do. If you remember in the Great Commission, right, he says, right, I have come to bring this message. I've come to do this thing for Israel. And now you will go out into the rest of the world. This was always the design, but Jesus was only here for a short time. He was only here to do one specific thing. And this Canaanite woman, this woman who would in one day certainly be welcome into the church, certainly wasn't welcome around Jews at this moment. And yet Jesus, who sees one of their greatest enemies, after hearing her plea and saying, even dogs get the scraps. Please, Lord, just give me a scrap of blessing. He heals her. He heals the woman's daughter. It says at that moment she was healed. We can assume that means that the demon was drove out and she was made whole again. And it's funny because this story kind of happens in this weird little pocket. Right? We have Jesus being confronted by the Pharisees one moment, and they're coming at him, and they're saying all these things, and we talked about that last week, about how they're living hypocritical, and Jesus is trying to call them out on it. And then immediately after, these hypocritical Pharisees come at him trying to say, you're not living good enough, you're not living pure enough, you're not washing properly, you're not making yourself holy and right before God. Then suddenly, the lowest of the low comes before him. And unlike the Pharisees, he shows her mercy because her heart was made right before God. Right? It's never been about, have you performed the right ritual? Have you done the right thing? Did you do enough prayers? Have you done this? Have you done that? It was always about, where is your heart? I bring this up all the time because I think it's so important for us to understand. And then immediately after this, it says Jesus left, verse 29. Jesus left there. He went along the Sea of Galilee, and he went up on a mountainside, and he sat down. Familiar picture for Jesus. Great crowds came to him, bringing the lame, the blind, the crippled, the mute, and many others. They laid them at his feet, and he healed them. The people were amazed when they saw the mute speaking, the crippled made well, the lame walking, and the blind seeing, and they praised the God of Israel. So Jesus calls his disciples to them. I have compassion for these people. They've already been with me 3 days and have had nothing to eat. I don't want to send them away hungry, or they may collapse along the way. His disciples answered, well, where could we get enough bread in this remote place to feed such a crowd? Well, how many loaves do you have? Jesus asked. 7, they replied, and a few small fish. So he told the crowd to sit, and he took the 7 loaves and fish, and when he had given thanks, he broke them and gave them to the disciples. They in turn to the people, and they all ate and were satisfied. And afterwards, the disciples picked up 7 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. The number of those who ate was 4,000 men, besides the women and children. women and children. And after Jesus had sent the crowd away, he got into the boat and went into the vicinity of Magadan. All right? This is impressive because often we know about Jesus feeding the 5,000. And we talk about that a lot. And I remember I used to always bring this up. I bring this up about Noah as well. I always say, well, how many of each animal got in the boat? And everyone always tells me, 2. And I say, no, it's 7. And they're like, what are you talking about? It's like right after the part where he says, you're going to have 2 of each animal, a breeding pair. It says in the Bible, in Genesis, that actually 7 of each animal were brought on because the rest were going to be for sacrifice. It's a strange thing, but again, it comes back to this idea of numbers. We've talked about this before when I talked to you about Jewish lineage and Hebrew genealogies. Numbers are more important than strict factual data. See, we have a real problem with this because ever since the Renaissance and we started really using science to help us to progress and allowing science to be that mechanism by which we kind of view the world, we really have this hard time with understanding how the ancient world viewed things. Because there's another detail about this feeding of the 4,000 that I want you to pay attention to. Who remembers how many basketfuls were left over after he fed the 5,000? Nope. 12. 12 is a big number. It's a really big number. What's that number? 12 is the number of tribes. 12 is the number of completion. 12 is a very, very, very important number in Jewish understanding, in the Hebrew understanding. And God often performs these things in 12s. But then, in this one, Jesus feeds the 4,000. How many are left over? 7, right? 7. Another big number, right? Where people often refer to 7 as God's number. And we actually see this in the genealogies, and we'll see this in different genealogies when you go through the genealogies of Jesus. We actually see them laid out differently because it's based on numbers and numbers of generations. Some are based on 12, some are based on 10, never based on 6. You would never do that. But there's certain numbers that are really, really important because more than strict factual data, what's more important is to show and illustrate that God was with them. Why do I say all this? I say all this because this is once again an incredible story about an incredible miracle, about an incredible thing that Jesus did. And by the way, if you think he only fed a crowd twice, I don't know what to tell you because we know from the book of John, if you remember when we went through the book of John, at the end of the book of John it says, and this was just some of the things that he did. If we wrote down everything that he did, there wouldn't be enough scrolls in all of the world for us to write everything down. Right? I'm sure Jesus probably fed crowds more often than this because if you notice the disciples' reaction in this case, right? We have Peter being real dull just a moment ago when he's talking about the Pharisees and when the Pharisees are coming and question him and ask him about purity. And suddenly this time the disciples are just like, well, we don't have enough food. Jesus says, well, what food do you have? He hands it to them. And they immediately know, we know exactly where this is going. Jesus has done this before. And they trust him implicitly, right? They don't question him this time. They just go with it. And it says they ate until they were satisfied. Afterwards, there were 7 baskets of broken pieces left over. That's amazing. And in both cases, in both stories, we see something about the provision of God. Right? Oftentimes, whenever we read about Jesus feeding the 5,000 or Jesus feeding the 4,000, this is what we get, right? We can rely on God, and God will provide. Right? Jesus later on will say, look at the sparrow. It doesn't reap or sow. It doesn't have to concern itself with the weather, the planting, or the harvest, or any of these things. And yet God takes care of it. How much more so will he take care of you? It's important for us to remember that God will provide. And maybe for some of us, we're like, yes, this is great because the provision of God and the mercy of God is on us. But if we look at who Jesus came and who he's speaking to, who's he speaking to? He's speaking to the Jews, the Hebrews. Because why? They're the special chosen people of God. So why is it that time and time again, who is it that we're seeing here? We're not seeing crowds of Gentiles. We're not seeing that in yet. We're not seeing that yet because Jesus came for his ministry to the Jews. But what we do know is later on at the Great Commission, once we get there, once we get to the end of the book, we know that that was not Jesus' intent to stop there. I've talked to you guys about this before, but it's worth reminding you again that the whole point, what Paul makes very clear for us in the book of Acts, or maybe it's the book of Romans, but what Paul makes very clear to us is this, that we have been adopted into that family. We've been adopted into that promise, the promise that God will always be with us, the promise that God will always provide for us, that we are no longer considered the outsiders, the untouchables, but instead we are brought in to become the family, the very children of God. That he loves us that much. But here's the interesting thing about adoption, is that if the child hates you and does not want to be adopted by you, you're not getting adopted. So one of the beautiful things about Jesus, one of the most wonderful things about Jesus is willing to provide. Jesus is willing to take care. But most of the time, we expect Jesus to give us all the things without us wanting to do anything in return. How many people have that very same complaint? They cry at the feet of their loved ones, and they say, why is my loved one suffering? Why is this happening? If God is so good, why isn't God fixing this? Why isn't God making them whole? Why does God allow this kind of suffering? And yet at no point are they willing to turn to the great physician and say, you know what, I need your help. At no point are they willing to actually submit themselves under their leadership and say, you know what, God, I'm going to trust you. Again, there's also a sense of finality if you're not a Christian. Right? Whatever happens in this life, that's it. There's a real weight of that. And this has been noticed all throughout history, especially at things like funerals. Right? You go to a non-Christian funeral, it's a very different sense than a Christian funeral. See, at a Christian funeral, when our loved ones pass, right, the reason we say our loved ones pass is because we don't believe that they are gone. We believe they've gone to be with the Father. We believe that when Jesus looked to the thief on the cross and he said to him, today you will be with me in paradise, we believe that to be a fact. We believe that when Jesus spoke those words, when Jesus fulfilled prophecy, when Jesus said these things, that he meant them. We believe that when Jesus confirmed the scriptures and said that they are good and reliable and trustworthy, then we can use them. We believe that they are good for us even to this day. We believe them because Jesus died and rose again. Jesus didn't just show us some fancy tricks by healing the blind, healing the sick, healing the lame, providing food. No, Jesus did more than that. He provided us with a cure for sin. A cure for the ultimate problem, the problem that no one had an answer for. And you can see that this is a weight that's on everyone's soul, right? Whether you're in the church or not in the church, especially those that are out of the church. You certainly will see this. Well, I've been a good person, and they'll try and do their good deeds, and they'll try and earn their way into the favor of whatever deity they think that might be out there. And they think that if there's any sort of cosmic justice, it must mean that I have to do enough good things. But as I've said to you before, it's because we don't understand the weight of our sin and how heavy it unbalances the scale the moment that we do it. There's not enough good that we can do to outdo that weight. But who did understand? The Canaanite woman. She knew she had no right to speak to a Jew. She knew she had no place being in that crowd. She risked everything because she saw more than a man, more than a faith healer. She saw the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And she said, Lord, I submit to you. See, we like hearing those stories. We love hearing the stories about the lame being healed. We love hearing about people that were quadriplegic who can get up and walk. We love hearing about the dead raised. We love hearing about those that were on death's door suddenly being restored. We love those things. But the thing that I love that the Canaanite woman showed us is how much she was willing to risk in order to make that same confession. Because most of us will make that confession. Most of us will say those things about Jesus, but it doesn't cost us anything. It's easy to do in North America today. It's so easy. But she was willing to risk everything. Not only was she going and pleading, begging from a Jewish teacher whom all of the people around there would have hated her. By her mixing with the enemy, she was now putting herself on the outs with her own family, with her own people. And what she said was, it is worth it. See, the fact of the matter is that we have to come to that crossroads eventually too. Every single one of us is going to have to make that decision. Not all of us are going to make it at once. Not all of us have even made that decision. Maybe some of us here have. But many of us every single one of us is going to come to a crossroads somewhere in our life where it's going to say, is your faith in Jesus worth you losing something? And the question for you is, which will you choose? If you, like Jesus said before, have built yourself on the rock, your faith is on the rock, and you've got a firm foundation in Christ, then you know that no matter how bad the storm, no matter how terrible things are coming at you, that it is not worth abandoning ship, because guess what? You're just going to get swept up and swept out to sea. But if you haven't bothered building a firm foundation to begin with, you're just going to get utterly destroyed anyway. So in these days when it's easy, in these days when faith is cheap, when faith isn't hard, because guess what? There are forces in this world actively always trying to get rid of Christians since our very inception, from the moment that Christ died on the cross and it was a crime to be a Christian, to now when they're trying to make it so we can't talk about Christ. The fact of the matter is, you have to ask yourself, what are you willing to lose in order to pursue your faith? Are you like the Canaanite woman, willing to risk everything? Are you like those, or are you just like those in Capernaum that Jesus condemned earlier, who said they came for the show, but then when push came to shove, when things got hard, they went, I don't know. It seems a little too hard for me. Every one of us is going to come to that crossroads. And I implore you, I beg of you, please think about it now. Contemplate it now. Wrestle with it now. And build yourself up now, so that one day when you get there, you will be prepared and you will be ready to face those decisions head on.